On Tuesday, President Joe Biden announced a ban on all Russian imports of oil and gas into the United States. It was the right call, but in doing so, he failed to propose any ideas, not a single one, for increasing oil and gas production here at home. In fact, he declared that any impediments to boosting production have absolutely nothing to do with his administration's policies. But is that really so? Today on Jimmy at the Crossroads, I'm going to be joined by the president of the Western Energy Alliance, Kathleen Sgamma, to break down the facts of the matter and what's really going on here, contrasted with Biden's alternate energy reality. Jimmy at the Crossroads with yours truly, Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Get started right now. And it is a real pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, especially amidst such a catastrophic situation across the globe. As right now in Ukraine, Russia continues to kill innocent lives. The world has united in a way that we haven't seen really in decades. Not all the world, but so many corners of it, in a way that we haven't seen in so long. And it is profound to recognize that, but the way in which the world is retaliating or acting here against Russia's aggression is through the economic leverage that they have. The United States and others leveling intense sanctions on the Russian government, on Russian oligarchs, so on and so forth. And of course, earlier this week, President Biden finally announced that he was banning all Russian oil and gas imports into the United States, just as some other countries have begun to do. Now, this is a pretty big step in some respects, but the important thing to keep in mind is that he's doing this amidst a rise in prices, the cost of fuel for Americans and energy for our homes that is dramatic and precipitous, and he refuses to do anything about it. In fact, Joe Biden instead insists on going after the oil and gas industry for price gouging.
To the oil and gas companies and to the finance firms that back them, we understand Putin's war against the people of Ukraine is causing prices to rise. We get that. That's self-evident. But, it's no excuse to exercise excessive price increases or padding profits or any kind of effort to exploit this situation or American consumers, exploit them. Russia's aggression is costing us all, and it's no time for profiteering or price gouging.
Is that what is really going on? Let's break down the reality with the president of the Western Energy Alliance, Kathleen Sgamma, who joins me now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Welcome to the program. It's good to have you today.
Great to be on, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. You know, it is such an important time to get an understanding of what's really happening, I think, in the oil and gas industry. You heard Biden imply right there that, oh my gosh, this is just an instance of the industry price gouging and precipitously raising prices to excess. Is that what's going on here, Kathleen?
You know, the finger pointing is so disappointing. It's a typical trope from a Democratic president, right? Or, from the side that doesn't like the oil and gas industry, that this is price gouging. Well, obviously, Russia just sent prices skyrocketing. We don't set the price. So I represent producers. We're price takers, not price makers. What does a high price do? It serves to rebalance that market. So as we see those prices go up, that does encourage us to then respond to that, produce more, and more production brings down prices. But what's going on right now is a global shock that has caused prices to rise. So for him to immediately turn around and accuse us of price gouging is, I just don't think the American people are buying it.
Oh, I don't think so either, especially when you look at the fact that the policies of this administration have undoubtedly, Kathleen, been hampering the industry. Now, he denies that. In fact, here is Biden at his press conference, or rather at his announcement regarding banning Russian oil imports into the country, where he insists, I am not holding back the oil and gas industry.
It's simply not true that my administration or policies are holding back domestic energy production. That's simply not true. Even amid the pandemic, companies in the United States pumped more oil during my first year in office than they did during my predecessor's first year. We're approaching a record levels of oil and gas production in the United States, and we're on track to set a record of oil production next year.
The idea that the Biden administration is not having anything to do with the precipitous rise in gas prices, for example, that we have seen not just amidst the Russia crisis, but even before this, is just mind-boggling to me, except when he's trying to persuade the American people of something that is clearly not true, Kathleen. What's going on in regards to the administration's impediments right now?
Well, I just want to react to that clip just a little bit in that don't compare, things go in trends, right? So Trump inherited Obama's policies and he had to ramp up from there, right? Now Biden is inheriting Trump's policies where we were ramping up, we were recovering from COVID. And so just to make that first year to first year comparison is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the obstacles, the purposeful agenda put in place in the name of climate change to impede American production is a long record. There's all kinds of video clips of him saying just the opposite: no federal oil, no fossil fuels. I just don't think the American people are buying it. They know that this administration is hostile to the oil and gas industry, and they know their energy prices went up well before Russian tanks crossed the border of Ukraine.
Now, if you listen to the Biden administration, not just President Biden, but his White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, you'll also hear a similar narrative specifically saying, look, the oil and gas industry, they can go ahead and produce now. What do we need to provide them with an embroidered invitation? Here's Jen Psaki earlier this week.
Nearly 60% of leased acres remain non-producing. That's a lot, in the range of 20 million acres. So there are 9,000 unused approved permits to drill in. That should not require us inviting them to do that. They should do that themselves.
The additional permits. So would the president?
What additional permits do they need? They have the leases are there, the permits are there. I don't think they need an embroidered invitation to drill. They are oil companies.
You know, Biden said something on Tuesday as well about existing oil and gas leases that I'll play in a moment. But how about that? What do you need if not an embroidered invitation to boost production in the oil and gas industry?
Well, there are a whole series of permits needed. A permit to drill is one thing. There are air permits. There are rights of way permits for pipeline infrastructure. One of the ploys of this administration working with the environmental lobby is to stop pipelines and also to stop any flaring. So if there's any natural gas at all on your oil well, it has to be captured before you can put that oil well in. Well, guess what? That requires a pipeline to capture that gas. So you can have an oil well held up for a natural gas pipeline. There's the purposeful policy of suppressing capital to our industry, both through regulations, nominations to the Federal Reserve, and just working with activist shareholders to make sure that we are starved of capital. So we have lots of members who can't get the capital they need to respond to these high prices and start drilling. Now, when oil is $125, does that shake even the greenest, ESG most focused fund manager or investor who suddenly goes, well, you know what, I could make a lot of money by investing in oil and gas now. So I think some of that shakes free just from the market, but this administration has done a purposeful job of trying to block capital to our industry as well. Not to mention all the court cases we're in trying to protect leases, not to mention the red tape with new regulations that they've been putting in place. So there are a whole host of ways that this administration has tried to trip us up. So yeah, I think Jen needs to get out her needlepoint and embroider us an invitation. And that to me means a strong signal from this administration that they're calling off the regulators, that they're calling off those who would deny us access to capital, that they're rescinding the nomination of Sarah Bloom Raskin, who for years has written about decapitalizing the industry. So there are things that they can do in that invitation that would make a big difference.
Yeah, it's striking. Last Friday on Bloomberg, Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh was asked repeatedly by Jonathan Ferro, who's doing just a phenomenal job over there in Bloomberg in this exchange, have you even made phone calls to the industry? Because we're hearing from executives that you're not even trying to ask them to boost any sort of production. And that gets to the heart of something that I wrote about in Friday op-ed for the Washington Examiner, entitled "It's Biden's Alternate Energy Reality. We're Just Suffering in It," where I make the point, Kathleen, on how the Biden administration has banned Russian energy imports, but he needs a scapegoat to point to for inevitable price hikes that isn't just Russia. The administration has been exclusively blaming Russia's invasion, but now they're clearly priming the pump, pardon the pun, to blame America's oil and gas industry. Now, I'm here in Colorado. You represent the Western Energy Alliance. The West is all about energy production, and that is so crucial to the economy. There are so many jobs, so many livelihoods that depend significantly upon the success of this industry, and they're the producers that will actually help to address this crisis so that struggling Americans can pay their energy bills, which is a big reason why I'm so incensed about this, because here in Colorado, we have an administration and Governor Jared Polis and in the Colorado State Legislature, which is run by Democrats, that has consistently been going after the oil and gas industry in ways that kick out jobs, that reduce revenue to local communities, because keep in mind, that's what they do. They pay taxes as well. And I don't understand, except for political purposes, why the Biden administration can't grasp that.
Well, I think that alternate reality is what's the crux of this. The alternate reality of the president and the left that is controlling this presidency is that fossil fuels are bad. And if we just get rid of fossil fuels, then renewables will take over and we'll all live this peaceful, perfect lives. Well, renewables are great, except they don't do everything that oil and gas do. So they're intermittent. They can't provide 24/7 electricity. They don't do anything for transportation. And I know, we should all be driving electric vehicles, according to Secretary Granholm. And, then our problems would be solved. But electric vehicles run on coal and natural gas. So, there is no alternative energy that does everything we do. So just shutting it down does nothing for climate change. It does nothing to supply people with energy. It merely shifts that production elsewhere and the greenhouse emissions elsewhere. So doing this in the name of climate change absolutely does nothing for climate change. But it's this alternate reality, it's this narrative that they can't get off of, which is everything is about climate change, and everything related to climate change means that you have to get rid of oil and natural gas. Well, natural gas has done more to reduce greenhouse gas emissions than wind and solar combined. So we can be a partner in that, but we're not going to be in a partnership that is unrealistic, because if people have energy, people die. We're seeing that in Ukraine. We're seeing how Germany is beholden to Russia because they get all their energy from Russia. And Germany just spent 2 decades spending hundreds of billions of dollars on renewable, and they're now today more vulnerable to Russian oil and gas than they were before.
It's such an important point, and it dovetails in with Elon Musk, who he's the CEO of a massive electric vehicle company. In fact, when you think of electric vehicles, you often think of Tesla. And even he said, I hate to say it, but we need to boost oil and gas production here at home. And yet again, as you just pointed out, again, we're talking with Kathleen Sgamma. She is the president of the Western Energy Alliance. As you just pointed out, Biden is totally hung up on this idea that the right way forward is simply to reduce oil and gas production and boost more of this so-called green energy. Here is Biden on Tuesday talking about how cutting the red tape won't do anything, but clean energy will.
Loosening environmental regulations or pulling back clean energy investment won't. Let me expand. Will not lower energy prices for families. But transforming our economy to run on electric vehicles powered by clean energy, with tax credits to help American families winterize their homes and use less energy, that will help. And if we do what we can, it will mean that no one has to worry about the price of the gas pump in the future.
As I write about in the Washington Examiner Day, Kathleen, if you think about it, news flash for the central planners, transforming the economy takes time, lots of time. And meanwhile, the American people are struggling to pay their electric bills, their gasoline bills, and gosh, to just get by in their day-to-day lives because Biden inflation has now hit again a 40-year high.
He's saying that we should do the same thing that Germany just did for the last 2 decades, that California has tried to do. And California has highest energy price, one of the highest energy prices in the United States. Germany's electricity prices are somewhere around 60% higher than ours because wind and solar are not cheaper. They're not. They have to be backed up by natural gas or coal. So you have to build 2 power plants to provide the same amount of energy. And Germany's already shown that when you increase wind and solar, energy prices go up, electricity prices go up. I mean, it's just, we have the model already. We know this clean energy fantasy doesn't actually work. Now, there may be discovered in the future an energy source that does replace oil, gas, and coal. But until that is found, this energy transition is not a transition to anywhere. And even Biden's own energy department just put out projections, not even 2 weeks ago, that show that oil and natural gas consumption will continue to increase through the year 2050 and will still be more than renewables through 2050. And it would be beyond that, except their projections only go to 2050.
Well, and there's a fundamental point here that I think bears mentioning, and that is that when you talk about an industry like oil and gas, it is a highly capital-intensive industry, and producers, anybody in that industry really, are looking out 5-10 years from now to determine what their trends are going to be, whether they want to invest in new leases. We'll get to specifics about leases in just a moment and how that works. But there are a lot of things that they have to project out of the future. And if you have a Biden administration that's saying, well, for the next 6 months, we want you to boost production to help us get through this, but afterwards, we really want to make sure that the crackdown continues, they're not going to make those investments long term that would produce more oil and gas, which, by the way, if Europe is cutting off its resources, energy resources coming in from Russia, they're going to rely on other countries. Would it be better for them to go to OPEC and Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, or would it be better for them to come to the United States and say, hey, why don't you guys help us out? We've been friends for a pretty long time.
Right. So you want to use us now. You want to say, oh, why aren't you producing? As if you weren't just trying to stop us producing for the last year and, some. And then you want to, though, continue risks, long-term risks, both political and regulatory and financial, well into the future when all of this subsides. You just want to be able to, continue to, nobody's buying it. He needs to send strong signals to back off his regulatory agencies. We're already strictly regulated. We should be strictly regulated. Oil and gas has an environmental impact. That's why we're heavily regulated. And that's why we make sure we reduce those, air emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. We're constantly working to improve our environmental footprint. But those regulations are already in place. What they're doing now is trying to over-regulate us out of existence, basically, and specifically with financial regulations that are meant to starve us of capital. So he could send strong signals to the market right now by backing off his regulators, by backing off some nominations to the Federal Reserve, he could approve all the outstanding permits today. Take that off the table. Approve of them all. Where's the Interior Secretary? No, you never see her talking about all of this. Well, her department controls all of this red tape that they put on permitting and leasing, and they're putting on roadblocks and more red tape to make sure that it's harder to develop on federal lands.
I put up on the screen there a snippet excerpt of your op-ed last week for the Washington Examiner, 6 Ways Joe Biden can crush Putin's aggression by unleashing the U.S. energy industry, which does delve in, of course, to several of these things, including overreaching regulations. But I also want to clear something up with you, Kathleen, about what we're talking, what Biden is discussing when he says, look, we've got 9,000 leases that are out there, permits that are out there, not being tapped into. What's the reality there? Let's take a listen to what Biden said on Tuesday.
In the United States, 90% of onshore oil production takes place on land that isn't owned by the federal government. And of the remaining 10% that occurs on federal land, the oil and gas industry has millions of acres leased. They have 9,000 permits to drill now. They could be drilling right now, yesterday, last week, last year. They have 9,000 to drill onshore that are already approved. So let me be clear. They are not using them for production now. That's their decision. These are the facts. We should be honest about the facts.
We should be honest about the facts, he says. Western Energy Alliance President Kathleen Sgamma, he says we have 9,000 permits that are out there. They're not drilling them. It's their own fault, and we have nothing to do with it. They could just turn the spigot on right away. Is that true? Are those the facts?
Yeah, from the man who said no federal oil. So we have 26 million acres that are under lease. A lease is not a green light to drill. A lease is just the first step. In order to develop on your lease, you have to go through years of environmental analysis under NEPA. Then, once you get through that, you might discover that you don't have economic quantities of oil and gas on your lease. You know,
Not enough to justify production.
The amount is so little that that lease is not worth producing. So there's that. And then there's my organization is in court defending 2,200 leases. All of the leases basically issued since 2015 are in some form of litigation. So you have environmental groups preventing us from developing on a huge amount of that acreage. Then you have environmental groups and federal pipeline regulators who don't want to put in the pipelines so that we can access those leases and capture the natural gas. Then you have a federal permitting system that is very slow, so that producers do have to go out and get 50 permits or whatever the number is that they need to stay ahead of their rig before they can contract a rig and get running. Because the last thing you want to do is start drilling and then have to lay down the rig because the federal government is not giving you a permit. So there are a whole host of factors that contribute to why we can't develop on all of the leases that we have, why we can't immediately drill on those permits, because it's not just one drilling permit. You got to get the right-of-way permit. You got to get the pipeline in. You got to put the capital together. You have to find the labor. Right now, there's a low workforce participation, so we're having trouble getting labor to actually develop and drill those wells. So the whole host of factors, it's not that simple.
Yeah, that's the thing when it comes to economics. Nothing is ever that simple, which is one thing the central planners can't understand. Hence why he could say from his ivory tower in the White House, we are going to transform America's economy in this green energy direction, as though he could somehow just magically set us in a particular direction. It is nonsensical. So when it comes to this debate, what do you think are a couple of things that the American people most need to understand about the reality of the oil and gas production situation here, and what needs to be done in order to help reduce the cost at the pump and the cost of heating our homes, and certainly hold down the precipitous rise that we're seeing, especially amidst the Russian-Ukraine war, but also just even when we move on to the future and when we hope and pray that at some point we will be able to get those economic years really rolling again post-pandemic recession?
Well, you know, one thing the president said was true. About 90% of production in the United States is not federal. And thank God it's not federal, because federal production is where they have the most control. So when we look at that 10%, the 90%, there's the getting capital, they won't put pipelines in. All those problems still apply on non-federal lands. But on federal lands where he has ultimate control, they could send strong signals. All right, we are going to approve those rights of way. We're going to approve those permits. We are going to resume leasing. They haven't leased a single acre since he instituted the Biden ban. I don't care what the court said, the Biden ban on leasing continues. So there's things he can do in his power to send a signal to the market that he's not going to continue on with this political and regulatory risk to the American oil and gas industry. And that would ensure that producers would say, oh, well, I can commit the capital. I can get the capital. I can commit it. I can develop oil and gas. I can help bring down these energy prices now and well into the future. But we need some signal sent from the president. We do need that embroidered invitation.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice? Maybe it'll be all fancy, have the White House logo on it. Maybe he and Kamala Harris can have some smiling photographs and say, hey, come on, we're inviting you. We want you to participate here. But instead, here is the direction that they want to send us in. Again, this is Biden talking about energy independence in the appropriate way to approach that important good for the American people.
This crisis is a stark reminder. To protect our economy over the long term, we need to become energy independent.
You think?
I've had numerous conversations over the last 3 months with our European friends of how they have to wean themselves off of Russian oil. It's just not tenable. It should motivate us to accelerate the transition to clean energy.
It's somewhat ironic here as he talks, Kathleen Sgamma, about pushing Europe off of their reliance upon Russian oil, and yet we can see how their experiment, as you were talking about before, with green energy hasn't worked out quite as well for them amidst all of what we're seeing right now. And yet that's the direction he wants to go into in order to achieve energy independence, which, by the way, we pretty much had in the previous administration, at least near the end of it.
Yeah, we were energy independent. We were a net exporter of oil in 2019. Energy independence means energy that is actually reliable and affordable. And it's not switching to something that only is on when the wind blows and the sun shines. Normally, renewables are online about 20% of the time. You can rely on them maybe 20% of the time. But as Germany has found out, there are some days where you get nothing from renewables. So again, they have to be backed up completely by nuclear, natural gas, or coal, something that actually provides power.
And just finally here, as we wrap up with you, Kathleen Sgamma, where do you see the future of energy production here in the United States if we continue along this current path? I mean, is there any prospect for improving the dynamics, or does it sort of depend on what happens in the 2022 elections and then especially in the 2024 elections, which unfortunately doesn't help the American people in the near term?
Well, we were able to increase production under President Obama despite his political headwinds against our industry. Now that there's such a hue and outcry from the general public about high energy prices that is causing this administration to turn, we're still down about 1.2 million barrels a day from the United States. Now, we can't turn that on overnight because it does take time, but we can get back to a situation where we are increasing that production and filling in that 1.2 million barrels over the next year or so. So, it can be turned around, but I do think it becomes a political question at some point. And the voters are giving a signal loud and clear to this administration that they need to change course.
Absolutely. Kathleen Sgamma, again, president of the Western Energy Alliance. Thank you so much for your time today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. It was great breaking this important topic down, and hopefully we can get set on the right course. I do like a little dose of optimism right there at the tail end. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.